This podcast is coming to you from Wongal and Gadigal country, also known as Balmain, where the Edmund Rice Centre for Justice and Community Education is located. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the country we share and agree that sovereignty was never ceded. Well, welcome everyone to the next episode of A Just Generation. We're very blessed, very honoured, very happy to have at the Edmund Rice Centre today a very special guest, the former head of the Pacific Islands Forum, Dame Meg Taylor. Meg has a very rich history in the region, as well as in Papua New Guinea, as well as being a diplomat overseas and working for the World Bank and other organisations. But for those listeners who may not be as familiar with your story, would you mind sharing a bit of your history and perhaps what saw you take up the role as Secretary General with the Pacific Islands Forum at an important time in its history, your ongoing role as a member of the Pacific Elders' Voice, and other roles you're doing now?
Well, I was finishing up at the International Finance Corporation as the Vice President of the Independent Office of the Compliance Advisor Ombudsman. And I think the meetings had been held in RMI when they were looking for a new Secretary General, and the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea asked his advisors to give me a call to see if I would be interested. And I'll be very frank, I resisted for a long time. I wanted to go home to Papua New Guinea. I was hoping that they would set up the Sovereign Wealth Fund and I would be able to work there. And that as the time drew closer, Prime Minister O'Neill at that time said to me, "You have to make up your mind." And I said, "I will go." And once I made that decision, it was a whole commitment that I wanted to do and to immerse myself in the work that I was going to take up. My history is really more so in Papua New Guinea in terms of a young woman at the time of self-government with Sir Rabi Namalu, who was a friend from university days. We both applied to take up the positions of Principal Private Secretary and Private Secretary, and we did get the appointments and were able to work very closely with the Chief Minister at that time, Michael Thomas Samari, and to be part of that journey to independence. And then I stayed on with the Prime Minister for a little while, and then I went back to my work in the legal fraternity. But since I've did that and worked in the law and then went on to do my master's 10 years after practice, I then served as ambassador in the United States, Canada and Mexico, but I was based in Washington. Young to be an ambassador, but as Prime Minister Samari always used to say, everybody's young in this country in the responsible positions because we're a young country and you've all just got to do the job and do the best that you can. But it was a tremendous learning curve for me and trying to understand that world. But I was not a Foreign Service officer, so I didn't stay in that job. I then went back to the law, and then eventually there was an international search to establish this Office of the Compliance Advisor Ombudsman, which really gave a voice to people in communities that were impacted by private sector development bank, private sector that was sponsored by World Bank Group. That in itself was perhaps a very, very rich experience in terms of the work that I did.
Was that a safeguarding role in terms what we would call safeguarding in terms of, understanding the risk to community, or was it more to do with the financing mechanisms at play?
No, it's more to do with the accountability. The risk side of it should have been done by the financing team, in my view. That when you make an investment and you do your due diligence about the financial risks, you should be doing a social environmental assessment then, so that if there are communities that are negatively impacted, that you know exactly what has to be put in place. I mean, they do have the performance standards or the safeguard policies as it was in the early days. But being accountable means we didn't do the right thing and something went very wrong. And that's when my team would come in. So there was a dispute resolution component, and then there was the compliance component. And there's been some very interesting cases emerging just lately of settlements to communities that were badly impacted, several million. I mean, that's a financial settlement, but it's what people lose in the interim, which is something we've got to, accountability mechanisms in all the international financial institutions have to be very much aware of.
And were these mainly in areas of, say, mining and large projects, or were there smaller agricultural projects and other things that were part of the sort of remit that you had?
Large agriculture, oil palm, sugar, mining, infrastructure, they vary.
So, I mean, in that regard, has there been, and I mentioned the Pacific Elders Voice,
Mm-hmm.
it being a very interesting grouping of former leaders and thought leaders from the region. How have you found that process of coming together? After times in different roles and leadership, and the conversations that are being had, perhaps between each other, but also in the sorts of consensus positions that you take in making comments on with the region.
I think it's been a very rich experience because it's forced us to stretch ourselves, or I've had to, I know that, because I think when you're in senior positions, you're often briefed and you give a lot of responsibility back to officials to help design a response to something. When you are the voice itself, those the implications of everything that you say and do, you've got to we think through, and we debate them amongst each other. It's not like a conclusive outcome straight away. Sometimes there are differences of opinion, and we go back and forth until we find a place that we can then bring in an agreement. And I'm glad that we've done this. You have a elders group internationally, but I think for the Pacific we needed our own voice that we can speak. This is not to undermine authority, but to give an alternate view that consider these options when you make decisions for our people. What I would like to see us do more of going forward, and we've done it over the last year or so, but I think just a real emphasis is to focus with young people so that we can be exchanging ideas with young people.
I mean, I think it's one of those wonderful traditions of not just the Pacific, but also in Australia, the respect that we have for elders, the way in which the wisdom of people who have the lived and learned experience of a long period of time is incredibly valued in our traditional culture, but also in what they bring on in terms of their ability to speak with authority and mana to particular issues of concern of the day. And it's great that you're seeing that opportunity to come with younger people and looking at conversations to be had with the younger generation coming through. We talked a little bit about that in the presentation you gave just recently. On that point, I was quite interested to read of your athletic prowess as a young person, and we recently held an event that looked at social justice through sport and the sorts of opportunities that young people may have, in terms of using, if they get that opportunity, of a platform to pursue social justice. From those who spoke on the day, they drew a lot from the discipline they learnt in their sport of choice to other things they had done later in life. Was this the case for you as well, or was this just part of your journey?
Athletics for me at high school, particularly, it was my own time. It was a way for me to be in my own headspace, away from everybody. Yes, I ran in a team as well. I ran for the New South Wales championships for the 4x100 women's relay team, and we held that record, Saint Scholastica's, where I went to school. But I think when I became a pentathlete, it's very different.
Mm.
I would have loved to have been an Olympic pentathlon if I came from a very rich family that had horses and stuff. I mean, I had horses, but not the kind for jumping and that they have in the in the Olympic pentathlon. I don't think they do it. I'm not sure if they do it anymore. But in the athletics pentathlon, there are 5 events. And I think what it
Mm.
teaches you is adaptability to different techniques. And you have to have the perseverance of keeping your cool over time and overnight, particularly when the scores are so close. Teaches you about endurance and that you don't give up so easily. It's not just a quick flash and it's gone. These take you're more deliberate in your execution because each one counts. And I lost the goal there by a mere 3 points, which can be half an inch on the long jump board. But it happened. You move with it, and you know your own strengths and your own ability. It's not as if there was a philosophical basis behind all that when I was an athlete, but I've known you're the second person I think who's really asked me to think about that, and I have thought about it. Why is it that I approach things in a certain way? And I think there is a reflection of that. But to get back to social justice, I think that we should use all the avenues that we've got to be able to look for social justice and equity. And I think our family upbringing comes first. How we're molded at a young age in terms of how we receive other people is something that never leaves us.
No, I agree. I think it's all these strands of what make us who we are very important in sort of helping us navigate issues personally, but also bring our ability to lead in ways that allow for people to be brought along the journey with us. And part of that is the experience people bring from sport or from the arts, from music, from other areas. But obviously there are things that come with the discipline that come with, and the ability to work with others and to communicate with others, that makes it very useful. You've had a fascinating career, which has seen you work on legal issues, public policy, business, regionalism, as well as institutions, including the Bretton Woods and Pacific regional bodies. What would you advise a young person who may be thinking about choices they make in their career and life? And did you have a set idea of the pathway that you were pursuing, or did it come more in a sort of an iterative process of learning as you went?
Iterative processes and a desire to do things because I think I was more passionate about those journeys. I think I was a great disappointment to my father. He always used to say to me, "So Meg, you don't want to be a you want to be a judge?" And I'd go, "No, I don't think I've got the personality." He'd say, "Well, you would adapt to that role," and I'd say, "I don't think so." I think having an opinion that can change the world is important to me. And I think that the judiciary has a function, but I worked as a public defender. And in the criminal law system, I lost when I'd see people going to jail all the time in the rehabilitation. And yes, I used to go to the jail around Mount Hagen where I was practicing and go and see people there. But you just think, is this what I want to do? And the people who choose to be judges do us a great service to keep the law functioning within our countries. But I think you have to try and know who you are and how you could really live that life. I would urge young people to think about, and I do, don't be afraid to follow something that you have a passion for. because you will love to get up in the morning to go there and do it. Because if you don't feel that, then you're in the wrong place. But I think for the challenge they all have now is, where are the opportunities?
No, I think that's very sage advice. I think it's one that the young people today are not facing simple choices anymore. With even careers that used to be the solid careers of the past, with artificial intelligence now impacting on some of those careers, it's a case of, well, how do I navigate all these ideas, all these things that I want to be involved in or even pursue, but where the traditional path of career may be different. So I think it's great to hear from you on that. We've seen a lot happen in the past couple of months, including the announcement of the Australia Tuvalu Falepili Treaty and more recently the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund. Does this signal a reshaping of the concept of the Pacific and how it is configured and think of itself in the context of climate change and strategic competition? Or is it simply a pragmatic response to the emerging realities for many in the region where they are facing significant issues with climate change and with the changes in their circumstances?
That's a very long question there,
I know,
Alopi.
sorry.
I think it's a bit of both, but I think we all knew that the changes that are happening in the Pacific were going to come, particularly with climate impact, and how we were going to have to cope with that was going to come. But I think what we were surprised in the Pacific, that one of our island states would enter into an agreement with Australia that seemed to shake a lot of people. That, what does this mean for our sovereignty? What does this mean for our EEZs? What is the implication on our societies? What does this mean if migration starts happening to the communal way of life that we've had in many of our societies? And I think that's been a challenge for our countries. What were the other parts of your question?
I think you've answered most of it. It was also about the idea of how the Pacific thinks of itself, particularly when issues of sovereignty, issues of recognition of place may not be there in the same way that they have been in some cases for thousands of years.
Well, I think there are international legal definitions of statehood and nationhood, but it's not necessarily how people define themselves and how of a community. I think there is time now for a great introspection of how we see ourselves and how we define ourselves. And I think in the writings of Ali Haufa, a son of Papua New Guinea and Tonga, is that we are more than just the people of one place. We are connected to one another right across the Pacific. And I think people think that, for me as a Highlander from Papua New Guinea, that this is just stuff I've picked up in the Pacific. I'm passionate about it because I believe it. I believe that if we don't see ourselves with that interconnectedness, the future for us as people from the Pacific will dissipate. And then what will it be? A smattering of islands in this ocean, or are we a blue ocean continent that can define ourselves as this and have that respect and value for one another? I think what we really need to work on is we've got to educate our young people on the histories of who we are. I see a lot more done in Indigenous Australia than I do in our own island countries. Just because we all live there doesn't mean that we understand it and we respect it. It's about not living through the lens of what we see on television, but it's understanding who we are as peoples.
No, I think that's very true. I mean, one of the other questions I had was on this idea of the Pacific and this tradition of the solidarity and consensus as a bloc in addressing important issues, including climate change of recent, but also issues such as the nuclear-free zone in the region and other areas that the Pacific came together as a group and with a shared interest. Do you feel that the institutions that have served the Pacific pretty well for the last, since the post-war period, are able to address the needs of the region in the 21st century, whereas we've talked a little bit about there's a lot more pressure on from different aspects of both economic development, but also big challenges in terms of strategic competition and climate change. Do we need to think about, and given your role as the head of PIF, to recalibrate the regional architecture to address these current and future challenges, or do you think that in fact it's just the institutions just need to adapt to the new challenges of the day?
I believe that the leaders of the Pacific have agreed to a review of the regional structures, the regional architecture of the region, and they can apply it to the membership of the institutions, how they function, and how they interconnect with each other. I think it's really fundamental because I think you respond what you do, and then your structure drives it. And currently, you've got institutions that do some fantastic work. But you've got colonial powers sitting at the same table as them. And I think these are questions that come up time and again in debates around the power of within organisations, who influences what, who puts money where, etc. And I think that definitely, I think that it does. You may be an institution that does great technical work, but if you've got metropolitan powers sitting at your table to make decisions, people say, "Well, hang on, just where are we on this?" But I find also, though, Alopi, I raise a lot of questions about geopolitics, about these different kinds of issues, and write about them. And some of the responses I get from the Pacific is that if she keeps talking like this, then we're not going to get the support and the aid that we need for what we have to do. And to me, that really bothers me. I mean, are we so dependent on others for everything that we do? It's about our own resilience that is really, really important. And the negotiations that we have entered to in the climate space around loss and damage, that's not just about compensation. This is about rebuilding our society so that who are directly impacted by the climate impact that is perpetuated by other powerful nations. And we shouldn't feel ashamed of those kinds of things. And when we haven't, and we've also set up now, it still needs a lot of work done to it, I understand, but the Pacific Resilience Facility was something that worked on when I was SG. We just got 100 million from Australia on it. These things are to help our own societies, and that's really important. But we mustn't be afraid to say what we think, what we believe, and design the kind of society that we want for the Pacific, and not let it be defined by external powers that will not have to live through what our communities are going to have to live through, particularly with climate impact.
Yes, there's so much to think about in terms of the future of the ability of the region to maintain its sovereignty and to maintain its self-determination in many respects in quite a pressured environment. This question probably actually ties into that a little bit, but it would be good to hear your thoughts on Australia's recent referendum to recognise our First Peoples in our constitution and enshrine a voice to Parliament in that same founding document. I'd be interested to ask your thoughts on the outcome personally and in the context of how the Pacific, and in particular PNG, may be interpreting the result. Will it change how Australia is perceived, or simply reinforced existing views held in the region of Australia being, a particular power that and a particular society that works a certain way?
I personally was deeply, deeply saddened that the recognition of Indigenous Australia in the constitution of this country was not possible. But I wasn't surprised at the outcome, because I don't think that there was I think amongst certain segments of the society, in conversations you picked it up that they would be very supportive and wanted it to happen. But the rest of Australia, I mean, what does it say? For me, it was, if that's the way it is, do they really believe that the Pacific is their family? I mean, you hear people now saying, oh, don't talk to me about Vovale anymore. From the Pacific, they just say, what does it mean? They can't even recognize their own people. But you know as well as I do, being a Pacific person, that people will not say things publicly to offend. It's just the way Pacific people are. But people I think, have noticed it and now know exactly what will the position be of if you migrate to Australia, if you live here, and a majority of the society actually doesn't believe that you have a right to be there. But for a rejection of the First Nations of this country, it is in Papua New Guinea, people just shook their head and say, I mean, you know what it's like in our societies. We always say that in time something will happen, and that will be the telling point, and that will happen.
Yes, it's just I guess Australia wasn't quite ready for it at this point in time. But as I've sometimes reflected on, it was a very grown-up decision that we were asked to make, and in some respects, we responded in a way that probably didn't show us to be as mature a country as we thought we were. And I think it's something which we will live with now for quite a long time until we can be asked that question again.
But I think you've got to learn from this is that what was the engagement that could have been better? More consultations, but to bring both sides of the House of Parliament together and have it as a unified voice to carry this and build that so that there would not be a disagreement. I think Pacific countries are very good at doing that. We know that you don't take your differences to public places. You work that out before you get there. I mean, that's what I really learned working at the Pacific Island Forum was that consensus that is to be reached before you get into that public space. And yes, there were times when it was a bit difficult, particularly on climate in the forum at Tuvalu. Very long debates, 12 hours of leaders meeting. And I know some people said that the Secretariat should have had more control, but as Mokere Marauta was our Prime Minister who reviewed the Pacific Plan, and he said, bring the politics back into the region, debate the issues at leadership level and make the tough decisions that have to be made. And you can do that, but you can also do that having worked out some fundamental aspects of the decisions you're going to have to make.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the Talanoa process and bringing that to the Edmund Rice Centre as part of our work going forward, and so that is often about that safe space for conversation and consensus building that allows then for decisions for solutions to be found and sought. We've come to the end of the interview, but I have a final question that I ask every person that I bring on this podcast. And, everyone has a different view on it, but some people seem to say the same thing. If there were 3 pieces of advice you might provide your younger self, what would they be?
Listen, Meg, because I was not a good listener. I was so much in a hurry all the time, and I would be saying to young Meg to just calm down and listen to what I have to say. Focus on your work and start preparing yourself for the future. But I know that I probably would not have listened to it. I was just such a big head. And I had to learn a hard way, but I'm just being honest about that. I think I would have been a very difficult person that anybody tried to give wise counsel to. Yeah.
So that's one. Are there any? Is there a second and third piece of advice you'd give yourself?
I think if you can't listen, you're a bit of a, it's a struggle from the very beginning. I did think about this question hard because I just I know where I was when I was young. I think I was a great worry for my father. My mother was different. I think she thought she'll learn by tough experience. So I think what I would say, the second thing I'd say to young Meg would be, you are going to learn by tough experience because you don't listen and you don't take things, you don't listen to what elders are saying. You think you know everything. So listen, it's coming. So the same answer for first, second, and third. That is to listen.
I think they're very sound advice to your younger self, and I would completely agree in the same way. I learned to value listening to my elders over time, but it is something as a young person often it's hard because you think you know everything.
I Yeah, I just want to say one thing before I leave, and I know that when I get introduced at meetings, I'm introduced as Jim Taylor's daughter, but the pioneer in my life was my mother. She was the one that had to explore a whole civilization that she married into, and a lot of my strength comes from her. Thank you.
That's a very nice last bit to finish on. And thank you again for your time, Meg. You
Thank
are a
you.
wonderful example, not just in terms of leadership in the region and leadership generally, but also as a woman leader and one that has brought an enormous role model to so many in the region. And I know that is the case, having met quite a few who look up to you. So thank you for taking the time to speak to us at the Edmund Rice Centre.
Thank you. Thank you very much.